Good morning. I would like to welcome you today to the side event prepared by the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, the World Forest Society and Environment Special Project, which is termed IUFRO-WFSE. My name is Glenn Galloway from the University of Florida, and I will serve as moderator to this session. We are very pleased to have this opportunity to present a side event in this high-level political forum on sustainable development and engage with you this morning. As the flyer to this side event indicates, forests can be linked to almost all of the SDGs and are central for nature-based solutions and what are termed here as transformative pathways towards sustainability. Our speakers will build on work undertaken by IUFRO-WFSE, especially the recent book, Sustainable Development Goals, Their Impacts on Forest and People, published by Cambridge University Press. They will discuss the role of forests and forestry in transformative change and ways to bolster progress towards sustainability. Here I'm going to provide a brief overview of our session. First, we are pleased that Jukka Salovaara, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of Finland to the United Nations, will offer opening remarks for the side event. Following the opening remarks, Professor Will de Jong from Kyoto University will present Forest and Forestry in Transformational Change, highlighting the need for transformational change and how forest and forestry can contribute to this change if and when attention is also placed on mitigating potential trade-offs inherent in the global development agenda. After Professor de Jong's talk, Dr. Pablo Pacheco from the World Wildlife Fund will present From Forest-Specific Sustainability to Wider Transformative Change, Levers of Change Across Complex Systems. Dr. Pacheco will draw attention to global challenges and forest-related responses being undertaken to address these challenges, pointing out that a number of forest-related transformations are needed in order for these efforts to be effective. Our third presentation will be given by Dr. Bimbika Sihabati Basnet from the Center for International Forestry Research. Her talk, Advancing Commitments to Leave No One Behind, a focus on equity, gender, and governance, drawing attention to the importance of gender to people and forests and to inequality more broadly, and how forestry policy related to gender and inequality can help shape efforts to implement the SDGs. Finally, Dr. Pia Katila, IUFRO-WFSE coordinator from the Natural Resources Institute of Finland, Luke, will give our final presentation, Forest and SDGs, Building on Synergies for Transformative Change, pointing out how forests and forestry can be linked synergistically along two concurrent pathways inherent in the SDGs and associated targets. Following Ambassador Salovaara's opening remarks, each speaker will have 7 minutes for their presentation. By keeping to time, we'll have approximately 20 minutes at the end of the session for questions and discussion. Please use the comment box provided, indicating to whom you are directing your question or comment. And please keep your comments and questions as concise as possible. Now I'd like to invite Ambassador to give his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, and really thank you for having me at this side event on forests and transformative pathways to sustainability. You know that the one big thing at the high-level policy forum is always sort of engaging with NGOs and different stakeholders, the scientific community. So this is really a major part of the HLPF. And I'm especially glad that I was asked to speak about this topic because, as most Finns in a way, that, well, forests are a topic that we feel very comfortable with. As most Finns, I spend my free time in the forest, and tending the family forest has become some kind of a generational hobby in a way that we've done for generations. And I remember being a small boy with my grandfather in the forest, and he was always telling me that, that the work we do today is really to your benefit and later generations, in a way that there are no quick wins in forestry. And of course, forests cover about 1/3 of the world's land area and are really crucial for many ecological processes, from climate regulation to pollination and forest products. And they also provide habitat for a vast majority of global biodiversity, which means that the future of the world's forest is really critical for sustainable development at all scales, from local to global. And at the global scale, all people, the whole humanity benefit from the climate change mitigation and crop pollination services of forests. And a large share of the global population also benefits from forest-based products. For example, and also the sustainable use of forest products like timber for housing is a good way to capture carbon and mitigate climate change. It is estimated that some 350 million rural inhabitants are highly dependent on forests for food security, livelihoods, and energy, while an estimated 60 million indigenous peoples are totally dependent on forest for their subsistence. And we are really talking about major populations. That's like sort of more than the US population and then the UK population combined. According to new estimates, the estimated total value of the world's forest can be as much as 150 trillion, nearly double the value of global stock markets. And this is a conservative estimate because it does not fully capture, for example, the value of forest biodiversity. But unceasing deforestation threatens the continuous provision of important forest ecosystem services, such as climate change mitigation. In the most recent 5-year period, the annual rate of deforestation has been estimated at 10 million hectares, which is really a huge amount and is not sustainable. And we all know that forests can contribute directly and indirectly to the achievement of all the SDGs. And at the same time, many of the efforts toward achieving the various SDGs and related targets will also have major direct and indirect impacts on forests, the services they provide, and the ways they are used, along with the distribution of their benefits. This reflects the interconnectedness of different sectors and issues and is not unique to forestry. The Agenda 2030 does not explicitly address the interlinkages among the SDGs, but they are there. One of the best ways I got a grip of how everything is interconnected when an Oxford professor sort of said that, the SDGs are like the Rubik's Cube in a way that you have to sort of have all the sides sort of in place for the totality to work. And of course it does not also address the potential for synergies and likely trade-offs among targets and the advancement of some SDG targets, such as building roads or improving infrastructure under SDG 9, for example, may result in unplanned negative impacts on forest and forest-dependent people unless it is carefully planned. The COVID-19 pandemic has further highlighted the importance of avoiding habitat loss and the role of healthy forests and sustainable forest management in preventing future epidemics. It's about preserving biodiversity and natural habitats. I'm really honored to be with you this morning, and I wish you well and thank you for having me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. That was very relevant and important introductory remarks. Now I'd like to turn the floor over to Professor de Jong for his presentation.
Thank you, Glenn. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to give a brief talk on forests and forestry in transformational change. And with this talk, I want to explore what we mean with transformational change and what it has to do with forests, or in other words, how can forests contribute to achieving the transformational change that we are seeking. Now, if you look at reports that assess global and what they may mean for future human well-being, then often you see maps like these. These 4 maps, for instance, show 4 global threats, all of which can be linked to unsustainable use of natural environments. 2 of the maps show expected negative impacts of climate change, for instance, the one on the top right on agricultural yields. And if you look at the map on the lower right, that shows predicted threats of mosquito-transmitted infectious diseases. And that threat can directly be related to land use and land cover change, including deforestation. Now, what people have done over the years, they have come up with a number of models that reflect the key causes of current global challenges. And here I touch on 3 of those, and then I make linkages with forests. The one we probably are most familiar with are the Sustainable Development Goals, and these provides an elaborate frame of targets and goals that the international community has proposed itself to achieve over the next 10 years, and which should resolve the global threats that we saw in the previous slide. The first one on the top right is a model called the planetary boundaries. And these are benchmark values of a number of environmental conditions that should not be exceeded, or if they have been exceeded, efforts should be made to return Earth systems to below those values. And then the third one on the right are the so-called shared socio-economic pathways. These are 5 socio-economic global scenarios linked to emission and climate change outcomes. Now, what I've tried to do here is to make links with these 3 different models and forests and forestry interventions. If you look at the planetary boundaries model, it appears that forests are relevant for 5 of the 9 planetary boundaries. And relevant means here that on the one hand, forests are affected when these boundaries are transgressed, and on the other, that in principle, forests or forestry measures can contribute to returning to within these planetary boundaries. As for the SDGs, as Glenn mentions, only last year we published our book, The Sustainable Development Goals and Their Impact on Forests and People. And possibly the major lessons from that book is that on the one hand, forests can contribute significantly to achieving sustainable development targets and goals. But it's also every time becoming more evident that the pursuit of these, at least a subset of goals and targets, may have negative impacts on forests and other natural environments. And then finally, the chapter that we published in the book in 2014, also with IUFRO-WFSE, we did conclude that the different shared socio-economic pathways have important implications for the role that forests play in addressing a number of socio-economic challenges that will transpire under different scenarios. Now, you can take these relationships between forests and the 3 different models, and then think about possible forest implications, forest measure implications, which is what I tried to do in these slides. In the case of the planetary boundaries, forestry measures would mostly imply conservation and sustainable management and restoration efforts. In the case of restoration, choices can then be made on what are priority planetary boundaries that one should address, and the restoration approaches can be adjusted accordingly. So you can then ask, do we restore capture carbon to get back to within that boundary, or do we restore, assure the restoration of the biosphere integrity? A similar story you can make for the SDGs. Different targets and goals can be linked to different forest interventions. To contribute to SDG 1 and 2, forests need to generate income or food sufficiently. But if you want to contribute to SDG 15, then forest conservation is the best strategy. And in the case of SDGs 3, 7, and 9, for instance, those should ideally be pursued without resulting in negative income impacts for forests. As for the shared socioeconomic pathways, the demand on forests will vary depending on which scenario will. If scenario 5 prevails on the upper left quadrant, then there will be more demand on forests for its carbon capturing and storing potential. In the case of scenario 4, the demand on forests will be to generate adaptation opportunities. So, as a wrap up, I think there are a few general conclusions that one can draw from these reflections. There are many challenges and threats that can be linked to how human community has and is been using natural resources, including forests. These threats are captured in different models. Depending on which one you look at, the contribution to transformational change of forests varies. I think nowadays we're all heavily within an SDG frame of mind, or even within a forest restoration frame of mind, which is also a topic that lots of people are talking about. But I think it is important to realize that there are other models out there, and different models do indicate what are possible forest contributions to transformational change and how these potentials can be made realities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor de Jong, for your very interesting presentation, giving insights into we are dealing with a complex agenda with a lot of potentially conflicting demands on forests. And I think the next presentation by Dr. Pacheco will delve into this further. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Pacheco.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Yes, what I'm going to focus my presentation now is looking at what are the transformations that are needed across complex systems to achieve forest sustainability and how they are connected and what would be needed to emphasize in the future. We know that forests, that there are 5 major global challenges that we have to face. One of those challenges is reversing a rapid process of biodiversity loss. There are several studies indicating how worrisome is the fact that we are losing biodiversity. The second challenge is about how can we keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees, and this has been built into the Paris Agreement. The third challenge is how are we going to be able to meet dietary needs of 10 billion people and be able to sustain food security for all people in the globe. The fourth challenge, and now this is more relevant now that we are facing the pandemic, is how to sustain human health, but also preventing future pandemics. And the fifth challenge has to do with securing the provision of renewable energy and be able to substitute different sources of energy. Always there has been the thinking that forests contribute. There are different responses that have been put in place to contribute to face these global challenges. For example, conservation, conserving forests and avoiding the future conversion of natural, intact, or primary forests, however you want to call it, contributes to some of these global challenges. So for example, on reversing a rapid process of biodiversity loss, the mitigation role of forests, and also how and now we know more about the role that forest plays on preventing the zoonotic disease outbreaks. But also there has been this thinking in the forestry world that there's need to manage more and better the forests that we have, and also including secondary forests. And this is also going to contribute to some of these challenges. And finally, increasingly, there is this agenda that's focusing on restoration, because also we know the potential that restoration of forests or forest landscapes may have to contribute to some of these global challenges. But what we are doing is not enough. So we cannot keep we need to change the business as usual. There's need to scaling up some of the approaches that are working effectively to contribute to these challenges. There's need to accelerate the speed of uptake of some of these approaches, but at the same time to ensure inclusion and equity. And there is this emergent discussion about the permanence of these solutions. So let me move a little bit about how do I see the transformations that are needed. We are talking about complex systems. They have complex interactions between social systems, economic and ecological. I came up with this diagram which tries to simplify these complexities and also try to find out what are the most critical transformations that I see are needed if we want to enhance the contribution of forests to face those global challenges. And by taking care also about the dimensions that are connected to this discussion and the goals that are also embedded on the SDGs, which is preserving, improving, enhancing the quality of life of all people, supporting processes of economic development, but also ensuring forest health and forest integrity into the future. There are three areas in which transformational changes needed that have to do. The first transformation that I'm calling following the thoughts from others. The first transformation has to do with transforming markets, value chains, and food systems. The second transformation has to do with enhancing collaboration, ensuring equity and well-being. And the third transformation has to do with embracing the multiple value of the forest. As you can see also, if we want to support these transformations, there are multiple levers that we can use. For example, when looking at transforming social systems, I think one of the key ingredients of that is enhancing social collaboration. And for that to happen, I think there's much more need of taking more seriously leveling the playing field. So recognize rights that it don't just involve social rights, but economic rights and rights to fundamental rights, like recognizing the tenure rights of populations that are vulnerable. Also improving the access, fair access and distribution of benefits, access to land, access to finance, access to markets, access to social services, and also enhancing check and balances. That has to do with improving the governance, participatory processes, and mainly the accountability systems that we have and may not be working quite well. Also on the market side, I think we have been dominated by the engine of market competition, but I think there are ways in which those systems can be shifted by mainstreaming and expanding responsible finance, shifting the ways in which we think about expanding infrastructure, moving to processes of embracing more actively green infrastructure, less linear large-scale development of infrastructure, and also technology. Technology offers multiple opportunities for shifting the way in which these value chains are working. And also changing of, we also acknowledge the importance of values and behavior and shifting consumer preferences, and also for people to be willing to compensate to those who are taking care of nature. So some critical levers of change, and there's important discussion moving in that direction, is about the role of diets and nutritious diets and more efficient food systems. Also, the need for more inclusive, fair business models, and the need for accounting for the full value of forest. However, whatever these transformations are, in my view, they have to be connected with what's happening in these landscapes. We have a different configuration of landscapes in terms of forest cover and who are the players in these landscapes, but also there are multiple responses options that can be implemented, are being implemented in these landscapes that need to be scaled up, need to be adopted more actively, like set aside protected areas, recognizing tenure rights for indigenous people, moratoriums to avoid the conversion of agriculture into forest management, agroforestry, regenerative agriculture, reforestation, and natural forest regeneration. So there is need to connect all these responses to these global transformative processes in ways that could be able to enhance the uptake of the responses, accelerate the implementation and adoption of the responses that could also help to face the global challenges. So 3 main messages that I want to end up with is improving the connection of landscapes and the transformation in the overall systems, more synergistic forest-related responses at the landscape level, and being able to address socio-ecological interactions if we want to enhance and sustain the contribution of forests to the global challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Pacheco, for your very interesting presentation. Just a comment, I'm seeing from this that are coming in that a lot of people are having some connection issues. So I'm inquiring, this is being recorded. I'm assuming that it is. So if it is being recorded, we will make sure that everybody has access to the complete session if you've had difficulty with the connection. So we'll continue as if everybody's hearing very well, and hopefully this is being recorded. So now I'd like to continue with our third presentation and invite Dr. Sihibati Masnet to give her presentation.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting me to share a few words at this forum. My name is Bimbika, and I'm an associate at the Center for International Forestry Research, and also a Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor at the Australia-Indonesia Partnership for Economic Development. So my talk today is really about what Pablo called the third transformation in his. And it's really about why and how a focus on gender equality and inequality more broadly must be at the center of any policy discussions on transformative pathways to sustainability, including in forestry. So what I want to talk about is how this global vision to leave no one behind, which really embodies the heart of the SDGs, can inform policy and action on forestry, and similarly, how policy and action on forestry can also contribute to the design, implementation, and monitoring of this vision. And what more suitable time to talk about this topic than in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic? My discussion on equity, gender in the forestry sector, therefore, has to start with COVID-19. So what started off as a health pandemic has turned into a social and economic crisis, which in turn is exposing deep-seated inequalities within and between countries. The figures are staggering, from reversing the gains made in poverty reduction to widespread job losses. For countries like mine, Nepal, where remittance has been the lifeline both for the households and the economy, flow of funds coming into the country from overseas migrant workers have experienced a nosedive with profound consequences, not only now, but also into the unforeseeable future. From a gender perspective, COVID-19 has exacerbated unequal division of work within and beyond the household, exposed gender segregation in the labor market, the pervasiveness of gender-based violence as many are still in lockdown and social restrictions remain. So these concerns about inequality along income, geography, race, ethnicity lines, with gender as an intersecting dimension, has also seeped into the world of forestry. So not only are discussions underway about the role of human-nature relations in creating this pandemic in the first place, the COVID-19 pandemic as a precursor for what's to come with the looming climate crisis in the horizon, questions are also being asked about the role of forests as a safety net for the poor and the vulnerable, as the speakers before me presented, to disruptions to smallholder agroforestry system and implications this has for food and nutrition security. As harrowing as the current time is, the fact that these issues are being actively raised and debated, not only in forums like the UN, but by a critical mass of people, is also a real opportunity for a turning point. The US is only among many examples of rising social movements demanding for a dramatic change in the social and economic order. So with gender and social inequalities in the front and center of the current discussions, what do addressing SDG 5, which calls for achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, SDG 10, which calls for reducing inequalities within and among countries, mean for the topic of today's discussion, which is pathways to sustainability? I think there are three main issues. First, these are foundations for changing the very direction of policy discussions on pathways to sustainability. gender and inequality issues need not be justified on the basis that they will contribute to sustainability or is among many other pathways. Rather, reducing inequalities and achieving equality is at the very heart of what sustainability means in the first place. It also provides a framework for forestry to contribute to this larger global effort. Finally, as the presenters before me have highlighted, it calls for a partnership among a wide range of actors. And such an international forum and this panel comprising of government representatives, NGOs, and research organizations is but one illustration of that. So at the same time, concerns about inequality and inclusion have always been a part of research, policy, and action on sustainability issues in forestry. There are volumes of different approaches, but one that stands out is on environmental justice, which me and my co-authors have talked about in our chapter. So in a nutshell, there are three dimensions. The distributive dimension, which talks about having fruits of one's labor being appropriated by others, being cornered into poorly paid work or dearth of income or wealth-generating opportunities, being denied basic living conditions. The second is about recognition. This is much more about sociocultural injustices that devalue people on the basis of class, race, ethnicity, caste, or other aspects of identity. And here the focus is really on identity and self-determination. And then the final one on representation justice, which talks about parity and participation in the participation process. Society is fair to the extent that it makes participation possible for everyone. So I was just talking about, let's look at SDG 10.1, which calls for narrowing the gap between the bottom 40% and the national average. This is fundamentally related to concepts of distributive justice, addressing economic marginalization and deprivation. 10.2 on empowering all irrespective of age, disability, race, is fundamentally about recognition, justice, valuing difference. SDG 5.5, which I haven't shown in my slide, is about ensuring that women have full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership, which is essentially about representative justice. Within the world of forestry, then, we see that these dimensions of justice, which my co-authors and I have argued in our chapter, are also at the heart of SDG 10 and SDG 5, and they inform a wide range of what is being done in the field. And in my slide, I've illustrated some of these, from facilitating representative justice in local management of resources to assessing global policies on whether they promote recognition justice to Indigenous people living in and around forests. All of this work, if and when well linked to the SDG process, can inform the design of policies and grassroots level efforts to reduce gap between the haves and have-nots, and they can support efforts to hold government, private sector, and others for action or inaction. So here I think I've gone over my 7-minute time slot because of this technical issues. But I've tried to show in my presentation why it's important to focus on equality and gender, how SDGs provide a way of harmonizing and coordinating these efforts, and in what ways policy and community action in forestry sector can also contribute to both the implementation and realization of this vision. So that's it from my side. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. Also for your resilience, being able to continue after your interruption. But it's very interesting how the current crisis has really shown a light on the centrality of issues of inequality in the SDG agenda. And I think, although this is a terrible crisis, if that has created greater awareness about that, at least that would be one positive outcome of what's currently happening. So now we will have our final presentation, and I invite Dr. Katila to give her presentation.
Thank you very much, Glenn. I will briefly discuss about the potential synergies between forest and SDGs. And also trying to connect forest to the SDG targets that relate to the levels of change that Pavlo Pacheco was talking about in his presentation. Forests are usually addressed in SDG 15 that calls for sustainable use and management and conservation of forests. And I would like to repeat here a little bit what Ambassador said in his opening remarks, just highlighting the crucial importance of forests and the ecosystem services that they provide. Forests sequester, for example, a large amount of carbon in woody biome soils, and they are the largest of carbon after oceans. And as we also already heard at the beginning, forest ecosystem services are essential for food security and nutrition by, for example, providing soil protection, nutrient circulation, pest control, and pollination services. Furthermore, 3/4 of the planet's access to fresh water comes from forested watersheds. But deforestation and forest degradation threaten the continuous provision of crucial ecosystem services. Forests can be directly or indirectly linked to almost all SDGs. But the pursuit of some SDGs and targets can have negative impacts on forests and people, especially through impacts on land use, leading to trade-offs. For example, the expansion of agricultural production for food security or for poverty reduction in rural areas under SDG 1 can lead to deforestation. Also, infrastructure development, because, for example, road construction and expansion of road networks has been one of the strongest drivers of deforestation by opening up new areas for unsustainable logging. And it can also further drive agricultural expansion. But on the other hand, forests hold an important potential to contribute to achieving the SDGs. And there is a large potential for positive synergies among many SDG targets and the sustainable use and management and protection of forests. This for positive synergies can be harnessed through two parallel pathways. The first pathway focuses on SDG targets that aim at strengthening sustainable land and resource use that reduces pressure on forest resources. And the second pathway focuses on SDG targets that aim at developing policy and regulatory environment and improving capacities, which support and provide opportunities for sustainable forest-related livelihoods and development. About this first pathway, several SDGs include targets that focus on sustainable land and resource use. For example, progress towards targets that support increase in agricultural productivity, sustainable agricultural production, and reduced food waste can reduce pressures to clear forests for agricultural production. SDG 6 targets can favor forests for positive effects on water availability and water quality, and the implementation of SDG 7 can reduce the use of traditional wood fuels. Progress towards targets that focus on improved resource efficiency, increasing value added, and environmentally sound technologies under SDG 8 and SDG 9 can also reduce pressures on forest resources. And there's also potential for synergies with the targets under SDG 12, sustainable consumption and production. These focus on achieving sustainable management and efficient use of all natural resources and the adoption of sustainable practices by large and transnational companies and promoting sustainable public procurement policies. With respect to SDG 13, forests and trees have a central role in climate change mitigation and in strengthening resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disasters. The second concurrent pathway focuses on the design of appropriate policies, institutions, and governance systems for supporting and providing opportunities for developing and improving sustainable forest-related livelihoods and development. And these issues are addressed in different SDG targets that focus on participatory and inclusive governance and equal opportunities for all, including women and indigenous and other local groups. Another group of targets focuses on supportive administration, policy and regulatory framework, and effective enforcement, and accountable, transparent institutions such as tenure and rights to forests and land resources. Furthermore, several SDG targets focus on access to markets and finance, and on improving education, skills, and capacities. And these are all crucial issues for developing sustainable forest-related activities and for supporting rural livelihoods and development. And the list of targets mentioned in connection of these two pathways is not exhaustive, but shows the large potential for synergistic interaction among the targets when efforts towards reaching the different targets are not made in isolation, but in an integrated fashion across different sectors and scales, and at the same time paying equal attention to the social, economic, and environmental aspects. And this also requires looking beyond the, in many cases, narrow indicators. I'm here talking about the SDG indicators, which do not address all the different aspects of sustainability. Thank you. I want to finish here.
Thank you very much, Pia, for your interesting talk, and which summarizes quite well how the SDGs and the issues of forestry and forests are interconnected. Now we will proceed to some of the questions that are coming in. We haven't had a lot of questions, and I think part of that is due to issues of connectivity, but we do have some good ones. And so we will start with those. The first question is from Katie, and she asks, and I think this is for both Will and Pablo, they can work together on this question. What role do you all see verified carbon markets, or the gold standard, play in willingness to pay solution to conservation and restoration of forests?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, I can say something about that. Of course, if you have verified carbon markets, and if eventually forest-generated carbon credits will start playing a major role in there, then I think there should be a major interest in buyers of carbon credits. And buyers of carbon credits, I can imagine, and I'm sort of hypothesizing here, can be people who have to, or businesses or actors who have an obligation to reduce carbon emission or replace it with reduced carbon emission. Or you can have actors coming in there who try to facilitate people to contribute to generating carbon credits. So then I can imagine that some civil society organization is going to collect carbon payment from people who are interested in reducing emission, and that those funds can be used to pay for actors who generate carbon credits. And these can be forest carbon credits if eventually you'll have a major production of those. which of course is intended with some of the big plans that are out there, the 1 trillion trees. Once these carbon credits are being produced, then you get all these mechanisms. You would need those mechanisms to pay for that. So then you get a whole number of issues happening in that field. Not sure if you want to add to that, Pablo.
Yeah, I think verified carbon markets can be a small piece of the solution. But I think we have already seen that all the institutional aspects related to how those markets are implemented and adopted are not enough to avoid problems of permanence and leakage, mainly. So I think working on institutional mechanisms that could deal with those potential risks of these markets, but also I think another question is what are the distortions that are involved in this market? So I think in the sense that we are able to reduce distortions and put in place mechanisms that could help to avoid for leakage and secure permanence of emissions or removals, I think carbon markets can be, verified carbon markets can be seen as a part of the equation of the perspectives on how we shift the dynamics of markets, but also how we account for the full value of forest. And carbon is just a piece of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have a question for Bimbika. And it's, do you find that certain patriarchal societies are more open to women having control of forestry fields, especially since the female essence is metaphoric to nature? That's from Jasmine.
Thank you very much, Jasmine, for that question. Actually, I think it goes into the heart of discussions within sort of gender approaches to forestry and environment, where on the one side you have people talking about whether there's anything inherent within the feminine self, which supported or not supported by the larger society, contributes to women being sort of guardians of forests. To others who talk about relations of inequality as inherently shaping what people do, I would say I'm more on the latter side. I think patriarchy too, there's very many different types and there are very many different levels. And depending on, what the restrictions are, you see that there is no sort of single femininity. And, we've, in our field research, for instance, in C4, we've seen women, even in sort of traditional and patriarchal systems, being as willing to cut down forests as men are, and the incentive system being very different in others, where you see a completely different reaction. So I would say that, societal relations and relations of inequalities and gender sort of highlights that relations of inequality starts at the very household level, at the very intimate level, that those really have a bearing on what is feminine and what is not, and, what kind of incentives people have and what they don't. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you, Bimbika. Now I have a question for Pia. And this is also, I believe, from Jasmine, who turns out is from the Amazonian region. And she asks, I am in construction, but wonder if the American design sectors are connected to deforestation issues outside the US, such as the Amazon. Where can I find evidence of this? In other words, this linkage, I think, between infrastructure expansion and deforestation. And she's asking, if you know of any like trade surveys or import charts and so forth, where there might be sources of information that would provide evidence of how these investments are impacting deforestation.
Oh, thank you for that important question. I will not name any research or statistics, but there is a lot of information relates to international trade, timber trade, wood products trade, which clearly shows how infrastructure construction, building, and research in general in the global north affects what happens in the forest in the global south. And these impacts realize both even through legal timber trade, but then especially through illegal activities, which is very common in tropical forests.
May I compliment?
Yes, you may.
Yeah, I think infrastructure leads or trigger some other important processes that put additional pressure on forest. And I think there's enough evidence in the Amazon how the building of roads have triggered settlements, but also that's associated with expansion of some other extractive activities. For example, gold mining, and also triggers land speculation, which for me is a more important process. Also, I think associated to large-scale infrastructure projects, also we have to take into account, for example, the expansion of local roads that often are not part of these discussions, and we have to start looking at the connections between expansion of local roads, expansion of large-scale road development, and all these associated processes that the expansion of roads are triggering. And that, in some cases, and I think has been demonstrated for the Amazon, there are good studies that have been put in place connecting domestic markets, global markets to the development, for example, of cattle ranching in the Amazon or soy production in the Cerrado. So there are those connections that can be proved that those happen in those large ecosystems.
Although I'm moderating, I would like to add to that. I would invite you to visit the book, Sustainable Development Goals, Their Impact on Forests and People. And the chapter on infrastructure is actually quite interesting, and it also points out other examples of how infrastructure expansion does pose a risk to forests and under certain conditions. So that would be another place that you could look for additional information. I think we have time for at least one more question. This one is also from Katie, and it's what scalable solutions do you see as alternatives to traditional wood fuels like charcoal, which is used by the majority of rural people experiencing poverty? I know she's been working in Eastern Africa, Uganda. So, Pablo, maybe you could take on that one.
Well, very much depends on the context. I don't think it's quite easy to say that we can completely substitute or replace sources of energy. I think always there has been this big discussion about how to promote more sustainable practices of biomass production linked to these domestic markets for traditional sources of energy. And I think now there's thinking how to connect all this debate on restoration also as a way to fulfill those local needs for traditional sources of energy. But probably those are the cheaper options. But I think that has to be put into the context of substituting sources for other sources of renewable energy. But unfortunately, so there's need to think about transfer of technologies and finance associated with those other sources of renewable energy. So, and that has to be part of these big transformations that we are talking about, that also have to be as connected with transferring of finance and technologies for countries that want to substitute traditional sources of energy. And now they are cheaper for local people as well.
Thank you, Pablo. I think we have time for one more question. And I think this is potentially for Bimbika. In your opinion, what's the role of youth on these issues? Because when you talk about equity also, there's a lot of interest in youth, and intergenerational equity and so forth. So
that's a really good question. Thank you so much. Well, I think there are two issues here. One is that, you know, in some ways youth is the next generation. So yeah, certain sort of very regimented sociocultural practices can be changed for the better in the new generation. But at the same time, it also really depends on what kind of opportunities there are for people. So for instance, where I'm coming from in Nepal, you know, a lot of the really good work that was done on forest management, local level forest management, is now, you know, virtually being abandoned because people really didn't have enough jobs in the places where they were living, and the international markets opened up for absorbing the labor. So you have like a generation of people who've been detached from agriculture, not because you know, that they wanted to flee their places, but because, you know, the political economy of the context was such that there are very few opportunities left. And now, you know, going back to example of Nepal, but it's also a situation in a lot of countries where migrant workers have had to return because of the COVID-19 pandemic. You know, policymakers say, well, they can always go back to agriculture, but actually they can't. Or to, you know, local level efforts for sustainable agriculture and forest management, they can't, because that whole generation, that generational exchange never really happened because of these processes. So I would say that, you know, we shouldn't, you know, while there is a very important role for youth, we should also, like Pablo was saying, look at this question in terms of these interconnected dimensions, and you know, focus on not just, you know, okay, now the youth can manage the agriculture and forest, but, you know, what is required? Do they have the skills? Do they have the capabilities? But more importantly, has the rural economy shifted and changed that it actually, you know, makes things possible for them to lead a decent life? I would say that.
okay, thank you so much. I think we have to tie things up now because we've come to the end of the session. What I want to do first is thank all the participants for your patience with the difficulties we've had with connections, and thank you for attending. And I also want to thank all of our speakers, and especially also the ambassador who was kind enough to join us this morning. And I just want to wish everyone well during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. I know we all aspire to the day when we could return to some semblance of normality and hopefully make more progress on the important work that was discussed today. So I just want to wish you all the best, and we will be making the information from this session available. It is recorded. I got a message from the person the technical person who's working on this, and we will also make sure that those of you who have interest can reach out to us if you'd like to communicate directly with us. That was another question that we had from one of the participants. So thank you, everybody, and good luck and stay well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.